Hi,
Hi,
Eva. How you
Sebastian.
doing?
Good. How are you?
Tired because of the baby, but yeah. Other than that, it's also been an exciting week work-wise. So I guess there's been a lot of reasons to be tired. But excited
Yeah,
for this conversation.
good reasons. So even today, it's been a big day. A lot has happened just today. I think when we look at the EU climate policy,
Has
I don't know
Envy
where you want to
already
start.
finished with? Yeah, I think we should
Yes.
start with
I
the
mean, at
2040
least,
target, right?
so let's start with 2040 targets. There
Yeah.
is obviously, I mean, there's so many discussions happening around it right now because there's various interpretations out on various elements of various positions. And there are
Why
more
is it
questions
so?
than answers.
This is the first thing that really struck me: how vague it is. How like people have different interpretations of the same thing. Um, that's a
Well,
bit
talk about
problematic, right?
vague. You look at the EU's 2035 NDC, and that gets even more vague, you know?
And we'll probably get there too. What
Yeah.
stood out for you? Like, what are the things that for you, like in the 2040 target, you're like either most surprised or you find most tricky or positive, actually?
So, I mean, what we have to look at, I think, at the 2040 target is that we have the Commission proposal, and then we have the Council that has already agreed on the position, and the Parliament, they just voted through the compromise amendment one at the ENVI committee, I think in the last hour from this
Yeah.
recording. So we're recording it right after that on Monday evening. And so it looks like the parliament is also on track to adopt a position that is quite similar to the one on council, but not on all fronts. So there are also differences. Um, I guess there, for me, question mark is this question around international credits. We know that the council and the parliaments are proposing 5%. Okay, that's all well. And then there's a question about this additional 5% that that the EU member states could be using for their post 2030 efforts and targets, um, which because it's in a review clause, it sounded like, well, it's just maybe a review clause on how that 5% is being implemented. But if you look at the details, it doesn't seem to be the case because the first 5%, the overall, EU 5% is based on the 1990 emissions. But this member states' potential 5% is based on their post 2030 efforts, which is very, very different numbers, very different bases. And now there are, I mean, interpretations even across member states who were the ones agreeing on it vary, whether it's something that one is on top of the other or it's still kind of, 85 plus 5 equals 90. Not clear even today. It's this constructive ambiguity, or potentially not that, maybe just confusing things happening at night during negotiations. They lead to confusing outcomes. So that's
But the
the
main, but the main messaging on
5%
that is the 5%, and
lowers
then the
ambition.
other 5%, which actually doesn't add up to 10, as you said, because I heard it's a 2005 baseline. I don't know if that's true, but I was told that the additional 5% on member state levels is not 1990, but 2005. So it can actually vary
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of how much that is.
It's not 1990 exactly. So
Yeah.
it's different. But like how much, well, will that add on top? And so what is the real number if it's not 85 when you talk about the net emission cuts? Yeah, unclear. But also, I mean, from removals point of view, there is this. I mean, obviously, we work both a lot on durable removals, and we see the text in the council position that there should be a way to use surplus natural removals to compensate emissions in other sectors. And so, what other sectors? Does it mean using natural removals to compensate fossil emissions? That's a bit problematic, obviously. Lots of questions around what the pilot period for international credit use means, because it should be 2031 to 2035, which is um, within the scope of the 2035 NDC, but that has been agreed and that is domestic, if you look at geographic scope. So,
That's
and
an
you
interesting
cannot
one.
really transfer the credits from one NDC period to the other. Did everyone who agreed on it realize what it should mean in practice or not? I'm not clear.
Should have had you in the room, Evan.
And then this whole question about this biennial assessment by the Commission
Yeah.
that the Council has put forward in their position, because, historically we've had, increasingly tough climate targets set on the EU level, and there has been this kind of policy predictability, uncertainty for the private sector to make investments. And yet, suddenly you have this potential where the Commission could just check where we are every 2 years and propose changes. Where is that predictability now?
But I heard an interesting take on that last one, because I took that, and a lot of people took that as something quite negative, as an opportunity to water it down further and further, right, and not have that predictability. And then somebody who was apparently even more optimistic than I am came to me and said, what about the world? If the world changes, the world actually becomes more climate conscious again, more ambitious, and then we have an opportunity every 2 years to ramp it up again. I was like, okay, maybe.
Okay, one can hope.
One can hope. But if I can ask you, coming kind of to the removals bit, right? What was interesting for me, I was having meetings in Brussels before the council position was put out. And what I heard in those meetings from officials, especially in the Commission, was that they were really hoping for a clear mandate coming out of the 2040 target that would give them some wind in their sails for removals. And from what I understand, they got that from the compromise text, in the sense that removals are explicitly mentioned as a key component to achieving the 2040 target. Removals are explicitly mentioned or encouraged an integration with the ETS, right? And so I took that as something really, really positive, because yes, we have all these different CDR bits and bobs in Europe, but at the highest level, durable removals were not really yet, and correct me if I'm wrong, anchored in core climate legislation. And this seems to be the first time they are. So I took that as a huge positive for CDR. But again, curious to get your take on that.
That's a good message. And I don't see that this will not be part of the final agreement. So that is a great development. What else stood out for you? I mean, obviously covered quite a bit, but I mean, there's more.
So, I mean, the sheer amount of international credits is mind-blowing. Like for me, especially if we're talking about a 2030 to 2030, 31 to 35 pilot, plus then I guess full ramp up from 2036. I mean, back of the envelope calculation for me are more than a gigaton of international credits for the 2030s.
But the thing is, there are completely different interpretations, whether it's linear, whether it's cumulative, and you get very different numbers based on that. And somehow, like, there is no ultimate number that everyone agrees is the number. We have, again, this constructive ambiguity where everyone is happy that we have an agreement and they all interpret it in their own way. But eventually we need to be able to calculate what it means in practice.
But it's a lot. Like, even if it's cumulative, it would be 230 megatons, but still it's without the additional 5%, just the first 5%, right? But that's still a huge amount. And now for me, it really comes down to what international credits will this be. I understand there will be an impact assessment by DG Klima on this, which is going to be super interesting to watch and follow. And obviously, I think it should be removals for a lot of reasons, not just durable, definitely also nature-based, because again, the use case is very broad. But the supply is obviously not there, even if they want it, right? So for me, that's kind of the next question, is how this impact assessment will go and what that means for removals.
And that brings us to Article 6, right? Because that has been referenced in the context of international credits. And then interestingly, the Parliament, in their amendments, are specifying it further. So instead of just Article 6, they specify 6.4, which is, I know, a concern for many, because there are advantages by having it more open. One could still use Article 6.4 methodologies, and maybe some additional safeguards and do projects under Article 6.2, but then suddenly that would be off the table.
Wow. I assumed there was 6.2 because that would be much more practical at this moment. But
well, everyone, I think, assumed that it was 6.2, maybe informed by 6.4, but to some extent. Yeah, the parliament seems to be advocating for 6.4 specifically.
Wow. But this would give PACM 6.4 their first massive use case, right? Like,
well, now let's see, because as usual in the trilogues, you have 3 parties, and currently we only have Parliament pushing for 6.4, whereas the Commission and the Council are just talking about Article 6. And usually where you have 2 of the 3 on the same side, that tends to prevail eventually.
But 6.4 would be much, like, just from a pure quality perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, 6.4 would be the high road, right? Compared to 6.2, because 6.2 could be anything.
I've been in the rooms where people from the Commission say that they would prefer it to be 6.2 because this way they can build in more rigor than there is in 6.4. Basically, you can have 6.4 plus if you establish these kind of rules within the EU that these are the credits that meet the criteria, and then you would use those credits under 6.2.
Okay, but it leaves more space for low quality credits as well. I see what you mean. You can go higher with 6.2, but you can also go much lower.
Yeah, but the whole point of considering that is that because the EU will not have a random, like, whatever happens, there's gonna be eligibility criteria that these credits will have to meet. And if that list starts with it has to be 6.4 methodology, plus still certain things that the EU feels are necessary on top of it, because that's what the conversation has been like. That has been the point of it, because the concern has been that the 6.4 is maybe not good enough, and 6.2 will allow it to make it better. So it's like the other end of it. Well, we'll see what
I get it.
End result will be.
And this is super interesting. I didn't know that they'd gone for 6.4, the Parliament, in their final position. Wow.
Well, it's not the final position, right? That's ENVI. We're expecting the plenary vote in a couple of days now, which hopefully will go through as it already survived in ENVI. So we'll see.
Interesting. Okay, so that's the whole international credits bit, which I actually think for the removals community is super important, because again, this could be the biggest demand side driver for non-EU credit removals we've seen, right? If it's limited to removals in the impact assessment, for example. You're skeptical?
I'm not sure it will be only removals. No, I've said it so many times. The reason why it is in there is that the people who advocate for it did not have it in mind to be there only for removals.
I know.
And, it's in the end, whatever will be agreed will have to be as a compromise of these 3 institutions. And I cannot see how you will get council on board with only removals.
Yeah, it's going to be too expensive. And the whole point is for it to be cost competitive, right? And cost efficient, I think, is the wording. And removals are unfortunately not cost efficient if you're comparing them with other stuff.
That's the reality.
Okay, so that's that. Anything else? I know that there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Anything else on the 2040 target that you think stands out that we should cover? There's loads of stuff.
No, I think we can move on.
Okay. Do you quickly want to talk about NDC? Just because I wanted to follow up on what you said earlier. Like, tell me what you couldn't elaborate on earlier regarding the NDC.
Well, honestly, it's actually more difficult to say anything about the NDC. I mean, it's funny this time around because it's a range, right? It's not one number, which is different. So it's
why is it a range?
The range is so it's between 66.25% to 77.5%. So that's the range for 2035 of emission reductions. So it's really 0.25%, right? It's such a precision, but then it's a range of like more than 10%. But there's a reason behind it. It's explained in the NDC, because basically they took the trajectory between 2030 and 2050 and 2030 and 2040, and like one reflects one and one reflects the other, and that's how the range comes to be. It's very weird for communication purposes, I have to say. But the NDC is literally this headline target, and then a long explanation in the intro on all the good things that the EU is doing, all the policies that are already in place or being put in place. And then, like a very, very general table that specifies the geographical scope, which means no international
That's where the conflict
credits.
comes in. Yeah, that conflict I hadn't heard of before. That's really interesting.
I just double checked it, right? Like 10 minutes ago before we started
Yeah.
recording, and it's really, it is there. It lists the countries one by one.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. That would rule out the pilot phase, but not what happens after 2035, basically, right? But yeah.
Yeah, but then the question is, as you cannot really transfer credits between the NDC periods, so you cannot really also start creating them before 2036, and then later on only starts using them later. We'll see what happens with the pilot. Maybe there will be another solution.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That's NDC. Let's talk about CRCF. Today, the final expert group meeting on the current implementing and delegated act, I hope. It was interesting. It was a very different dynamic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was great. It was actually really nice to see that at this point, so much consensus had been reached, and that now it seems on a trajectory to being published.
Yeah, it looks like we are on track for it to be published. I guess there's still space for some little changes, right? But most likely we'll see the version in a few weeks that will go out.
What stood out to you? What are some of the sticky points that you feel are left hanging?
Well, I think the commission did a really good job when they're presenting all the feedback they got, the way they packaged it, per removal methods, and then per method, like which specific topics come up. It's really, there was nothing surprising in there for me, because yes, the biomass origin, yes, biochar permanence. I mean, these things we've heard so much about.
Yeah.
And but all in all, everyone was happier with the versions they saw this time around compared to last time around. And of course, there will never be a version that it makes everyone happy. So, but it sounds like Commission has done a great job in like getting us to the place where we are likely to have methodologies already in place under CRCF in a few months, right? Because we'll have the final version published soon, I guess in December, and then we'll have the parliamentary scrutiny period of 2 or 4 months, and that's it. And then we have it. And when we already have also all the verification rules in place and the first certification scheme recognized, then basically the whole system is operational.
One thing that I want to highlight, because it happened behind the scenes, but it was pretty obvious, I think, to everyone watching, is that there's been a lot of great collaboration behind the scenes on the biochar methodology, and actually with 2 organizations that the 2 of us are involved in, right? Zero Emissions Platform, Biochar Europe, coordinated by Carbon Gap. Thank you guys. Also Bellona, Cleaner Task Force, and basically it took a lot of the heat and conflict that we've seen in every single expert group. It kind of took that out by working behind the scenes on kind of a common position that everyone could buy into. That nobody was probably 100% happy, but everyone could buy into. That was shared with the commission, that was made public as well. The core proposition was to include essentially a 7% buffer on the biochar side that would be taken out and that would be released only after a couple of years, once additional research funded by the commission, gone through the JRC, would actually confirm that it was essentially safe to return them. That couldn't be taken on a short notice, but a lot of the other ideas and concept, for example, we got a 2.5% buffer pool now for biochar, right? Like that, some things were kind of made their way into this final methodology. And yeah, I think it's great that there has been some sort of agreement reached that everyone can buy into. So yeah, big shout out to everyone
Yeah,
who
and
worked
you
on
could
that.
really feel it in the room. It was much less confrontational,
Yeah.
and also on the parts that the commission was not able to take on, I think we got very clear answers why that wasn't possible. So yeah, I mean, great progress there, I have to say. I mean, again, obviously not everyone is happy. There are still, questions out there. There were lengthy discussions, but we're definitely in so much better place. So I don't see there being any major hurdles anymore on these methodologies getting adopted. I think the big question is which ones of these will actually end up having a role in the ETS, right? Because these
That's
are
the next
supposed to
big
be the
discussion.
permanent these are supposed to be the permanent carbon removal methods in Europe, but we know that for the ETS the Commission has quite openly, I think, said are considering bio-CCS and DAX inclusively, and they're not really considering biochar at this point. And I think
Which some
here,
people might disagree with.
some people disagree. I agree with that approach, of course. No surprise there.
No surprise here either. And
Yeah.
but yeah, and I imagine that whole coalition we've built around the Biochar Act, Delegated Act now. Yeah, when it comes to DTS integration, we'll need a new process because I'm sure there's strong different opinions. But again, that's for 2026. For now, I think we can celebrate.
Which is almost here.
Is almost here. One question I have for you. I saw Farron and Carbon Market Watch. They're basically the two who are still saying we should drop the whole thing, right? And the whole CRCF is basically not good enough. We should drop it. And most of the concerns keep centering around biomass, sustainability, additional biomass use, all of that, right? What's your take? Because my understanding is, and that's also how I heard Fabian and the Commission always argue, is that basically they're referring a lot to RED, right? And they're basically saying, like, in RED, we have RED, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're using what is said is good enough in RED, and that has to work. I'm not a RED expert. I don't know if you are, but like,
no.
Do you feel that because that keeps coming up?
What was interesting for me was hearing that the companies who would be project developers would actually be happy to share the origin of the biomass and from which country it's coming from. But because under Renewable Energy Directive it's not required, then that was the reason why the Commission said that they are not going to build it into the CRCF. So it's kind of interesting. They're trying to build the most ambitious scheme possible, and there seems to be a low-hanging fruit. But now they're just going for the existing policy framework as it is, and that's it.
But it also makes sense, right? Like, for example, when it comes to contaminants in biochar, it's a bit tricky because there's a fertilizer and product regulation that already, for example, for biochar would set a lot of these parameters, right? That are good and good enough, many would say. But in this case, for example, the Commission in some cases wanted to be very explicit instead of just referencing the other regulation. So there's kind of that precedence. With RED, they're just deferring. I see benefits in both, but obviously they said today the review for the delegated acts is going to be every 4 years, with the first one probably going to be started in 2029. That's a long time. Like, it's good that we have that every 4 years, but that's still a long time for something that is fairly novel, like CDR. So I personally think it's better to reference others so we don't have to go back to the drawing board too often.
Yeah, I think I guess there are pros and cons on all these options, but we cannot have a process where we are always in the review, because if you look at all the different policy frameworks that we keep reviewing, and it feels like, oh, this happens every 4 years, that happens every 5 years, but it's just something is always happening, and the plate is always full. So yeah, there has to be also, we have to be careful in terms of how many reviews and how frequent reviews we build in.
Well, we'll have the first review next year already of the legal text, which feels crazy because this stuff, like the CRCF hasn't issued its first credit, and we're going to be reviewing it.
It's not operational. I mean, that's what I kept saying already for a while, that we're going to be reviewing the scheme that is not yet even operational. So we can't really even learn from the first experiences we have with it.
So what will we be reviewing? Like,
Well, I guess we have learned a lot since it was first proposed and agreed. But I don't know. We'll see what the Commission will propose in the context of this review. And then I'm sure there's going to be a lot of inputs. I mean, my obvious question mark, and it remains until we get clarity on this, would be let's get more specific on the use cases. And I know we will hear that this is not within the scope of this regulation. Well, maybe one day it could be.
I mean, it will all come down now to the use cases. And actually, on that, I know we have a whole chat and quick publicity, right, on Wednesday on SBTI and ISO. Mm-hmm. But one interesting thing that I read in the CDI for AI SBTI analysis of the latest net zero standard was that the interpretation was that basically CRCF credits would be excluded from any SBTI claims, because SBTI in this draft explicitly says that essentially credits can't be attributable to an NDC if they're going to be used for an SBTI claim. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm simplifying here. And so that would de facto rule out CRCF, which I thought was interesting, because surely that is a use case that we hope would exist, corporate claims. So again,
yeah, with hope. But
one would hope.
Reality. I mean, there has been this question mark has been there from the beginning. I mean, even here, and we've discussed it before, if you talk about using the CRCF credits towards the NDC, and then we know that DAX specs, DAX specs are not currently within the scope of EU's NDC. So even if you wanted to, it wouldn't be contributing to the NDC at this point. So
say something. I think you've gone mute.
I have.
Yeah. Now really? You're back. You were just muted for 5 seconds.
That's weird.
But building the plane as we fly it, I guess. One interesting thing that could be in the review, I think, is something related to international credits, or do you think that that is irrelevant if we...
For CRCF?
Could it, for example, imagine it goes, imagine, I'm just wondering, we've built this infrastructure that we say in Europe is good enough for durable removals, right? Now we want to procure all these international credits. There must be some sort of link, right? Like we'll want some sort of benchmark for what we procure from abroad to be linked to the CRCF.
Yeah, but then the question is, if we're building the system now, when it comes to international credits around Article 6, then, I mean, under 6.2, we could use CRCF methodologies as we want. But we don't need to change anything within the CRCF for that specifically, I guess.
That's true.
It is meant for EU's domestic removals, but I think you can just copy paste and create a methodology based on it, saying that, well, and now this one with the same conditions applies for removals from outside EU and could be used in theory.
Yeah. No, I'm excited. Hopefully we'll see the first certified CRCF unit next year. Well, it would probably be biochar, I imagine. I can't really see what else would be certified in 2026.
I'm sure you were planning this plug already since the beginning of this chat.
We might get a ton or two of DAX, but I mean, DAX won't really start next year, right? So yeah.
No, then I mean, we have to get started, and then we need to get some experience in before we start reviewing the whole framework, right?
Definitely. Anything we didn't cover?
I think we did a great job, and as always, in 30 minutes.
That's the plan. We managed.
Yeah, we deliver.
All right, then. Thank you very much, Eve. Was fun talking to you.
Thank you.
And see you on Wednesday.
Until next time.